So, picture this. It's late February 2026, and the world basically wakes up to the biggest shock to its energy supply since, well, the 1970s. A war that felt a world away suddenly threatened to bring the entire global economy to a grinding halt. Today, we're going to break down the anatomy of that crisis. Let's get right into it. I mean, that's the big question, right? What actually happens when a fifth of the world's oil just stops overnight? This one question sent absolute shockwaves through every single market on the planet. Because you see, when the Strait of Hormuz, which is the world's most critical energy choke point, gets blocked, it's not some distant regional issue. Nope. It becomes everyone's problem, real fast. And the very first sign that we were all in deep trouble, it came down to a single number. $126. That was the peak price for one single barrel of Brent crude oil in March of 2026. Now, to put that into perspective for you, just a few weeks before, it was kind of hanging out around $85. This wasn't some slow, gradual climb. Oh no, this was a price explosion, faster than anything we've seen in any recent conflict. And it all started because one tiny, narrow waterway got shut down. Okay, so to really get a handle on the chaos, you first have to understand the geography. We're talking about a little strip of water that is, no exaggeration, the main artery for the entire world's energy supply. You know, at its absolute narrowest point, the strait is only 21 miles wide. Just think about that for a second. A tiny passage that you could zip across in a speedboat, and it holds the fate of the entire global economy. It's like this. If the Persian Gulf is the heart of oil production, then the Strait of Hormuz is the aorta. And back in February 2026, that aorta got clogged. Badly. And here's something that gets lost in all the headlines. It's not just about oil. Yeah, of course, 20% of the world's seaborne crude and natural gas flows through there. But look at this. A whopping 30% of all internationally traded fertilizers also pass through that same little strait. And what does that mean? It means an energy crisis can turn into a food crisis almost instantly. So the big question is, how did we even get here? Well, this whole blockade wasn't some kind of accident. No, it was a direct, immediate reaction to a regional war that just escalated with unbelievable speed. And when I say speed, I mean it. It all went down on one single day, February 28th. You had a U.S.-Israeli military operation called Epic Fury. Then, in those strikes, Iran's supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, was killed. Iran retaliated almost immediately with missile attacks. And then within hours, Iran's Revolutionary Guard gets on the radio and warns every ship in the area. Passage is forbidden. Just like that, the choke point was slammed shut. But the situation got complicated, and fast. See, it wasn't just one blockade. What actually happened was something we're calling a dual blockade, basically a strategic standoff where you had two opposing sides squeezing the very same waterway at the same time. So, here's how that played out. On one side, you had Iran. They blockaded the entire Gulf, going after any and all commercial ships. Their goal? To cause as much economic pain as possible to the whole world. And they used everything, sea mines, drones, you name it. Then, on the other side, you have the US. They put up their own blockade, but they aimed it just at Iran's ports. Their goal was totally different, to cut off Iran's money and its economic lifelines. And the result of these two blockades pushing against each other? Complete and total paralysis. And let's be crystal clear, this wasn't just some warning on a maritime chart. Ships were being hit hard. On March 1st, a tanker called the Skylight was attacked. It had to be abandoned, and sadly, 2 crew members were killed. Just a few days later, a tugboat, the Musafa II, was sunk by missiles. 4 more people dead. For the actual sailors out there, the area turned into a literal war zone overnight. You know, the attacks are what grabbed all the headlines, but that was just the tip of the iceberg. The real story is in the ripple effects, the quiet consequences of the shutdown that spread all across the globe, affecting people like you and me, who might not even be able to point to the Strait of Hormuz on a map. 20,000. That's the estimated number of seafarers, real people, who were just stranded inside the Persian Gulf. They couldn't get out. We're talking about roughly 2,000 ships. They were just stuck, trapped in the middle of a conflict zone, watching their supplies run lower and lower. And hey, remember that fertilizer number we talked about a minute ago? Well, here's the fallout. The price of urea, which is a key ingredient, jumped by 50%. That hits farmers directly, which makes it more expensive to grow food, and that ultimately means, you guessed it, higher prices for all of us at the grocery store. 70%. This number really shows you just how fast everything ground to a halt. In just the first few days, tanker traffic through the strait absolutely plummeted by 70%. I mean, would you risk it? Shipping companies weren't about to risk their multi-million-dollar ships and, more importantly, the lives of their crews. That artery we talked about, it was clamped shut, tight. So, this chart brings us right back to that very first number we saw. It really tells the whole story of oil prices. You can see it right there. Before the crisis, we're at about $85. Then that insane spike up to 126. And even now, with this uneasy truce in place, it's still hovering around 108 bucks. And that difference? You feel that every single time you go to fill up your car. Which brings us to where things are today, this incredibly high-stakes diplomatic scramble to figure a way out of this mess. Right now, it's defined by a really fragile truce and, let's just say, some very sharp political talk. And yeah, that sharp talk came right from the very top. In late March, you had U.S. President Donald Trump say this, quote, "I'm thinking about renaming it the Strait of Trump." It was a comment that really just perfectly captured how intense and, frankly, how personalized this whole political standoff had become. So, where do things actually stand right this moment? Well, according to officials, Iran has put an offer on the table, and they passed it along through mediators from Pakistan. It's pretty straightforward. They'll reopen the strait, but only if the U.S. lifts its own blockade and ends the war. And this part is key. They want to put any talks about their nuclear program on hold. It's the classic stalemate, right? A global game of you go first, no, you go first. And all of this leaves us with one last really important question. Look, this specific crisis might pass. The ships will probably start sailing again and oil prices might eventually come back down to earth. But hasn't this whole thing just exposed a fatal weakness in our global economy? Hasn't it shown us just how incredibly fragile our interconnected world really is? I mean, how much of our modern life depends on a few tiny strips of water that can be shut down in the blink of an eye? That, I think, is the real lesson of the 2026 crisis.